Hello, my name is Barry the Baron Rowland, and welcome back to the Baron's lecture series. In part one, entitled If Democracy is the Aim, Dotmocracy is the Game, I described a unique open ended process that provides school, business, or community leaders with an effective tool to gather data in a meaningful way from staff, faculty, employees within an organization to better ensure and maximize commitment to planning. Often that involves the selection of a competent leader for an organization or unit within that organization. As I mentioned in part one of the lecture series, I have been very successful at finding competent leaders for public charter and private schools throughout North America. Although I completed over 200 successful searches in the educational field, I have done some in business and community groups. And the same principles and strategies are applicable to leadership searches. In the next 5 videos, I will outline the steps in the successful leadership search and what has worked for me to better ensure that only candidates with the highest level of leadership competency are brought to the table for consideration. I have made the presentation and accompanying slides more user-friendly for those outside the educational circle. Specifically, I will speak to the following areas: how to ensure a successful search, why hire a search consultant, the search process, interview questions, assessing candidate material, selecting semifinalist and finalist candidates, the semifinalist and finalist process, the finalist process, behavioral interviewing, reference and background checks, how to identify candidates with the highest level of leadership competency, and how to ensure a successful search. Let me say before we begin, I do have a sense of humor. And often these lectures appear to be a little more professorial and teacher oriented. And I guess that's probably because they have to be more specific for those people who want to follow step by step in doing their own particular search or hiring somebody like me. The first decision, of course, is to decide whether to hire a search consultant or whether to do it yourself. There are several reasons why hiring a search consultant makes sense. First of all, he or she will be able to set a beginning and end of the search, usually 3 to 6 months. Secondly, the search consultant will give you an outline, the entire process in a more business-like, and the depth and scope will cover sourcing candidates to reference checks and background checks. A search consultant will bring a national focus, which will provide more credibility to the search and, of course, magnify it and extend it. The search consultant will provide professional guidance to identify what needs to be in place, like a position description, a process for collecting and screening dossiers, developing a select pool. A search consultant will also provide professional guidance when structuring things like interviews, closing the candidate, transitions, offers. And finally, in summary, a search consultant will provide an overall unbiased, fair, and transparent comparative process. The general process to network with colleagues of similar organizations for recommendation makes sense. You interview 5 or 6 potential consultants by phone, narrow it to 3 or so, and invite them in on site to give personal presentation on what they can do. If you decide to go it alone, you'll have to consider some things. First of all, cost, whether or not there's expertise within the organization, the risk of failure. In some cases, the uniqueness of the position, however, would make it more obvious to conduct a search in-house. For example, if you were searching for a CEO for a school for the blind, there are only approximately 50 schools in the United States to draw candidates from. And it's possible that there's enough expertise within your own organization in order to provide support for an appropriate search without an outside consultant. It's also important to consider that consultant will put into place a process designed to minimize the risk of hiring a stranger. Whether you do it or hire a search consultant to do it, there is always a risk. And the key is to minimize it. As you can see, there are additional considerations on the slide that you're looking at that a consultant will introduce to mitigate against the failure of a new appointee. You can see the involvement of stakeholders in the process, which is important. Identifying issues and challenges so you target the appropriate candidates. Information on what has to be considered to attract and hire a candidate. And introduction of a method to build in accountability and evaluation of performance of a new appointee. Second slide will indicate to you the actual search process. And you can see that there are 6 key points in that entire process as you begin to work your way through. First of all is the pre-search consultation, and which aims at developing an in-depth knowledge of your organization. And there's such things that need to be looked at, like interviews. Are you going to have focus sessions? Identification of issues and challenges, search timetable, advertising strategies, and that's all part of the pre-search process. Secondly, you see the development of the school and position description. And this is a position description, not a job description. So you'll have such things as the history of the school, the history of the organization, the mission, the vision. Are there any exemplary programs? What are the issues and challenges? What are the job expectations, job qualifications, personal characteristics required, and compensation? So a position description wants to answer the questions a candidate might have covering in the waterfront so that they get it all on that particular piece of paper and therefore has as much information as they possibly need. Third, you can see the candidate identification and recruitment, and that will be thorough and in-depth. So there'll be a decision on network sourcing, phone screening, resume review, examination of leadership skill and philosophy, a detailed interview, summaries of top candidates. Number 4, assessment and evaluation of candidates, and this will be critical. I believe very strongly, and we'll talk shortly about it, in behavioral-based interview techniques. You need to have completed dossiers for review. And then, of course, identification of semifinalists and finalists. And finally, the presentation of finalists. You will certainly need direct assistance of a search consultant as a committee member or board member by developing an interview format, questions, a process of evaluation and ranking, extensive reference checks, and so on. So you can see that there's in-depth, and the expertise behind having a search consultant do this is very critical. The search methodology, as you can see, is based on an ongoing partnership and communication between a search consultant and the search committee or the board. And the process, of course, is, as you see here, should be sophisticated, nationwide, and extremely effective in identifying and delivering candidates for the position of responsibility. Also, as part and parcel of what the search consultant will do is develop a search schedule. And you can see here, I've given you a sample of a search schedule that's up there. And you can see that, it's very clear that it's self-explanatory, but detailed in terms of providing sort of a step-by-step set of objectives to keep everyone on track. It's not cut in stone, but it will help people to decide on and see what comes next in the process of search. One of the things that needs to be done as well, besides having a position description, which is pretty wide and varied, is to narrow the field. So what's going to be must-have and nice-to-have? And now we're doing the separation, the nice-to-have. And you can see this CEO profile I would hand out to members of the board who are making the decision. And I want them to do this independently in terms of their own ideas. Send it in to myself or the search consultant so he or she can do a compilation. And certainly the compilation, therefore, will help to decide. And here's a sort of a summary of that compilation that you put together once you receive all of the information handed in. It'll show you what everybody said, as you can see, but bolded in all of these things are what more than one person has said. So now you've narrowed the target with those who are making the decision. So there are no surprises. You don't need surprises at the end of the search to be bringing the wrong type of candidates to the table. And once you have agreement that these are the things that most people are saying are must-haves in the scheme of life, then you can continue with some assurance that you'll be able to target the right people and bring them to the table. So consensus is very, very important in all of this. And here you can see the remaining part of that under various headings. So you're pretty well assured that the individuals who will make the decision have identified the things that are most critical to them in this new appointee. And of course, from here, they can begin to develop fit type questions in preparation for interviews by simply developing questions from some of the bolded material. Here's an example of the position description. As I mentioned, it is not a job description. So you can see here that there's a full outline of what you're looking for. There's also areas that candidate would want to know about, all the way down to essentially personal characteristics that would be required for the search. So this is the start, and this will give you an opportunity to get the search underway. Once you have the position description completed and the CEO profile page done, you can then develop a set of questions for potential candidates. You can see here there are two groups of questions. The first would be written, and you can see numbers 1 to 7. You would expect people to address those in a succinct manner. The second group, number 8 to 12, are done in a cold call. So you call the individual up once you've evaluated the material that has come in, and you ask these questions over the phone. And that will give you a sense of the way an individual will write and also how they can speak. And that will give you a part of the dossier that will be included with the resume. And of course, with the resume, we recommend that you do not format it. You simply send it as is. You want to see how people put their resume together and how they organize their thoughts. This is all important to the process. I mentioned earlier behavioral interviewing, and in my view, this is the key area for looking at candidates and getting a better sense of them. You can see I've identified some things that are the rationale behind behavioral interviewing. The questions require specific examples and are open-ended. The candidate has the analogous experience, management competency, and personal success or not, and that will be determined when they respond to these questions. The information can be verified through reference checks that they give, and as can the last section of questions on the question sheet that I showed you earlier that can also be used to verify reference checks. Basically, what a candidate does during the interview process under the behavioral interviewing is far more predictive of future performance. If you're looking for a superior communicator, observe how the candidate communicates, what he or she says. The second most predictive indicator is what the candidate did in a past analogous situation. So this will be gleaned through the candidate's own statements in the written and oral questions found in the dossier and from reference checks. And remember, the least predictive indicator of future performance is how a candidate responds to hypothetical work situations. What do you think is the best way to keep track of multiple tasks simultaneously, for example? These questions only reveal how well or how glibly a candidate performs in an interview. You want to make certain that the candidates who are very glib and can respond well in interview situations You have to drill down and give examples and be specific around the things that you are requiring them to answer. In this particular approach, if the behavior isn't forthcoming, you continue to work your way through the questions until you get exactly what you're looking for. Here's the package that you would use in the behavioral interviewing. I'm going to just run through it fairly quickly because there are many questions. You can use these at the semifinalist and finalist stage. You can see there are a number of questions on the one hand. On the other hand, you can see the set of rubrics each question has, and you can identify, comment, and evaluate their answers. Each question has a competency expected from the answer. Here's your group on vision, strategy, and implementation, leadership and management, programmatic leadership and builders, focus on outcomes, personal characteristics, and so on. And so that gives you a very good idea of what you're looking for. And you can see as well, at the end of a behavior interview, there are two very key and important questions that you need to ask. One is with respect to candidates' background and reference checks. You ask them specifically if there's anything in their background that might impact on the decision to offer them the position. It's very important that they give that right up front so that they have now gone on record in terms of what you're looking for. This particular interview can take up to two hours. Sometimes search committees want to look at a 1 hour behavior question format. Here it is. It'll give you an idea of what it looks like and how you put it together and so on, because you can also get the information as well off that. Fit type questions are also developed by the search committee. So your interview must encompass behavior interview questions and fit type questions that will be developed from the CEO profile that I spoke about earlier and the position description. And these are questions directly related to fit for the job. It's a different matter to be fit for the job and to be competent for the job. They're not always the same. And so it's important to narrow the field based on both of those areas. And so you can see there are several there that are examples that I pulled out of the information that you had. Here's a way of evaluating the candidates that you spoke with. This is a set of rubrics that people can take with them, and they can put candidates' information on there, come back with an evaluation and a summary in terms of selecting candidates for the semifinalist and, of course, the finalist stage of the search.